Welcome to the first episode of The Brief. I thought we needed to discuss things and ask questions that no one is really asking. No one is really asking so many questions about the Middle East, the war in Gaza, which is now on hold, I believe, but largely about the influence of religion, the influence of faith on the war, on how the war is conducted, on the goals of the war, on what's happening around us. And I think there's something that we really need to discuss that hasn't really been discussed at all almost. And it's the conviction of Muslims and the convictions of Jews in terms of the end of times. We now see that there are actually two prophecies that are really driving this war in a way. Two prophecies that are impacting to an extent how the Israeli government conducts this war. And also another prophecy on the other side, which is impacting, I believe, to a larger extent, how Muslims view this war. At least many Muslims view this war. But today I want to discuss the Jewish prophecy because it's very odd from my view as someone who grew up in a Muslim family, as a Jew who grew up in a Muslim family, as a Jew who is Jewish by choice, to look at the Jewish side and see that the Jewish prophecy is a prophecy that essentially somewhat fantasizes or predicts or really builds its narrative around defeat, at least defeat for Jews in the diaspora. And this is really interesting because this is very different. So the Jewish narrative, just to explain it to everyone, at least from the perspective of religious Jews, is that in the diaspora, we're going to see Jews persecuted. We're going to see that everyone in the diaspora and Western countries and Arab countries and elsewhere turning on Israel. So essentially, everyone abandoning Israel, everyone attacking Israel, everyone being on the offensive when it comes to Israel, boycotting Israel, all that stuff. And this means it's going to get really awful for Jews in the diaspora that they will end up migrating to Israel. And this is how, this is the beginning of the end of times. So I want to just show you two comments. By the way, the first comment over here is actually a comment from a dear friend, someone that I really respect, someone that I really admire, someone that I trust as well. But this conversation needs to be had. So I was saying that my faith is crumbling essentially because of the fact that we're seeing history repeat itself. The persecution of Jews in the West, which happened before across the Arab world and led to essentially the ethnic cleansing of Jews from most of the Middle East. And his tweet is very simple, as you can see. He's asking why my faith is crumbling, and he's saying, the goal is to bring back the Jews to the land of Israel and build the temple in Jerusalem. It will be done, preferably peacefully, and if we misbehave, less peacefully. The other comment is also from someone else that I know through Twitter, and it's a very interesting comment. It's someone, who's very decent, someone who's a good person, someone who's, I have nothing negative to say about them. I don't know them personally as much as I know the first person, but the other person is saying, biblically speaking, that is accurate. The Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Bible, says that eventually the entire world will turn on Israel. Now, the challenge I have with this is when you look at this, you're going to see that the Jewish narrative essentially says we will be defeated in the diaspora. Our PR war is going to end up with a defeat. Jews in the diaspora, British Jews like myself, American Jews, French Jews, German Jews, we're all going to be defeated and persecuted, and we're going to have to flee to Israel, where we're going to rebuild the temple and essentially live in peace. Have, the end of times war, Armageddon, if you want to call it this way. And actually, after this, we're going to end up, living in peace. We're going to win the final war. So, Jews will win the final war, and then we're going to live in peace. I don't want to get into the theological sort of aspects of this, but I want to focus on the first part of the prophecy, which is the defeat of Jews in the diaspora. Now, I want you to compare this with the Muslim narrative. The Muslim narrative says, for the end of times to happen, for Armageddon to actually happen, Islam will first be on retreat. So, it will sort of, many people will abandon Islam, and then Islam will sort of expand, and many people will become Muslim, many people will convert to Islam. But the Muslim narrative is largely the opposite of the Jewish narrative. So the Muslim narrative believes that, Islam will dominate. Islam will become, the dominant force across the world. People will convert to Islam, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in America, wherever it is. And then there will be the final war, which is again going to be in the Holy Land, Armageddon, and from the Muslim narrative, it will end with the defeat of Jews and the Muslims liberating Jerusalem. So that's the Muslim narrative. I think it's really interesting to look at how the Jewish prophecy or the Jewish narrative is actually playing out in real life, in real time as we speak now. So I have two challenges with this. Do I believe that the temple will be rebuilt at some point? Yes, I do believe so. Do I believe that there will be, a war to end all wars? Probably, I do believe so. This is likely, and you can actually feel, that many people after October 7th, especially Jews, we do believe in this. We increasingly believe in this, at least from my own personal experience. People do feel like it's coming. There's going to be, Armageddon at some point, and this is why you see, Jews across the world, even in the U.S., having the flag of, Mashiach, which is the Messiah, if you will, and essentially suggesting this is the end of times. But I think I'm really concerned with the fact that we seem to be under the impression that this is the war that will end all wars, and it's okay now for Jews in the diaspora. Well, not okay, but it's sort of expected, it's predicted. This is what the Bible says, the Jewish Bible says. This is what our faith says. We cannot win this PR war by definition. We cannot win this war because it's God's will that we lose this war in the diaspora, that everyone will turn on Israel, and then we all will go back to Israel. Now, I have a few questions about this, and I think this will be part of actually a wider conversation with Jews. I believe, we should have influential voices discussing this, especially when it comes to Israel's, the Israeli government's policies. To what extent does this prophecy affect the Israeli government's policies? In other words, is the Israeli government not really fighting the PR war or not really putting in a real effort, which is what I believe. I don't think they're putting in, they're not putting in 100% of what they can. I would probably say they're not even putting 50% at least. And that's really the main question I have. Have we essentially given up on the PR war in the West, in America, in Europe, because we believe that eventually, look, there is nothing we can do. God says they will turn on us, and by definition, this is what's going to happen. And there is no point in resisting the inevitable, essentially. And you can see, this was the case from, Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments when he said, Jews have been losing the PR war for hundreds of years, essentially, and, there is not much we can do about this. Now, the second question I have is, what if this is not the case? So if you look back at the Holocaust and you look at what was happening to Jews across Europe, across even America, by the way, most people do not know this, but few Jews were really accepted in America, easily. Everyone struggled, it wasn't like, a very warm welcome, let's give you refugee status. It was actually really, really challenging. Many Jews were turned down, even from countries like Cuba. Even from countries like the UK, they were told, no, you were not allowed in, and essentially refused to be allowed to flee to the UK or America or whatever it is. And many of them had to go back to, where they used to live and face, essentially death. And this is where it gets interesting. So the Holocaust, we saw Jews globally being persecuted. And we did see, increased immigration to Israel. What if that's the same case now? It's somehow another wave of Jew hatred taking over Europe, taking over the West, taking over America. And it will at some point, sort of subdue. At some point it will decrease again and everything is going to go back to normal. And we're going to be able to, rebuild our lives in the West, in a few years. And, things will sort of, at least on the surface, it will not be as awful as it is now. It will sort of, I suppose, sort of be, not as noticeable as it is now, not as blatant as it is now, not as, brazen as it is now. So that's the question. What if this is not the end of times? Why are we, or many of us at least, seem to be accepting defeat in the PR war? Why do many of us seem to be accepting the fact that this is it, this is the end of times, we're not going to be able to do much about this, and that's essentially it, and we should just give up and just basically move to Israel. There's not much we can do, and essentially move to Israel and sort of, live our lives, build Israel, and wait for the end of times, basically. I think I have a very personal challenge with this. I don't find it easy to give up. I don't find it easy to just decide, look, you know what, this is just going to happen. They're all going to turn on us. They're all going to hate us. They're all going to persecute us. And that's it. The other issue I have with this is the Muslim narrative, which is accepted by the overwhelming majority of Muslims. You see Muslims mobilizing in the UK. We now have the Muslim vote. We now have, increased interest by Muslims to get involved in politics, to actually influence UK politics on the Middle East, on the economy, on everything you can think of, really. So we see an imbalance, in my view. We see Jews sort of withdrawing and deciding there's not much we can do. We are always going to lose the PR war because of anti Semitism, and also we're always going to lose the PR war because of essentially it's what God said would happen. It's just inevitable. On the other side, you see, a very focused effort from Muslims who are choosing, no, we're going to invest in this. We're going to be far more impactful than anyone else. We want to drive Britain into a direction that we believe is consistent and aligns with our values and interests. And I think this is really the key challenge that I have. I don't really know how you can manage this, but it's seriously challenging. I don't know how you can, again, whether this impacts Israeli government policy, but I think it's really quite awful, and I think it really needs to be addressed. And we need to ask this question. We need to just, collectively as the Jewish community, we need to ask, is this where we're going? Is this essentially our choice collectively? Obviously, there's not going to be, one voice that represents all Jews, but there is at least, I think, the Israeli government's policy, which matters to a great extent. Is Israel going to fight for Jews in the diaspora? Is Israel going to fight for our lives, our rights, and also the PR war to win over America, to win over the West, to win over the UK, Germany, France, everywhere else? Are we actually going to fight this war like it counts, or have we chosen to abandon this? So tune in for the next time. This is just essentially, an introduction into this topic. I want to interview an Israeli government minister. Ideally, I would like to interview Amichai Shikli, who is the Israeli minister of the diaspora, because he's the one who's far well suited, I suppose, to discuss this. From his view as a minister of the diaspora, what does he think? Does he think we should just go back to Israel and give up and we're never going to win the PR war? Or does he actually believe that no, we need to stand and fight? Because that choice, by the way, was actually made by Jews during the Holocaust. Many Jews stayed and fought, which is, unlike what many people believe. Many people believe that Jews were slaughtered like sheep. That's not the case. Many Jews joined in the fight against the Nazis. Many Jews had the chance, after fleeing the Nazis, after fleeing Germany, after fleeing Poland, to go back, to find firearms, to get training, and go back and fight the Nazis across Europe. That happened with many Jewish heroes, and we have this in history, and obviously it's something that you can look up. It's very easy to find out. So is this going to be our choice? Are we going to fight again for Jewish life in the diaspora? Or have we given up on Jewish life in the diaspora, and we should all just pack and go back home to Israel? Tune in for the next time. I want to have Amichai Shikli and potentially a British Jew to discuss this, to discuss how people see this, and get basically your views, and also let me know what you think in the comments. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much.